And very good evening to you. Very good evening to you. Good night to those of you who are in that zone. Good afternoon to those of you who are on the west coast of the United States. And those of you further afield, whether you're in Africa or somewhere in Asia, good morning, good night, good evening, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Want to thank all of you who have continued to support our program and with your presence, your comments, your contributions. Want to thank you all so much. Those of you who joined us last evening, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And would like to welcome you to today's program. Social media influencers, as you all know, that's a description that I am tickled, as I said last night, I think. I'm tickled, sweet by welcome. Last night we started our discussion on elections, and because everyone is talking about whether we'll have elections this year or next year. And, we decide political office via elections. So we have to talk about elections. But, elections in a place like Guyana is not the same as elections in some other places. In fact, as we speak, all over the world, the question of democracy, what does it mean? What it entails? That's a question people are asking all over the world. The United States is usually cited as the model for democracy. I would like to amend that a little bit, the model of electoral democracy, because, democracy is much more than elections. Elections are a very important plank of any democratic society, but it is not the only plank. You can be an electoral democracy, that is, that you hold elections, but after the elections, you govern as an autocracy. We know in Guyana that we have a problem of governance. We've always had a problem of governance, always. It's nothing new. But we have especially had a problem of governance in the last 3 years. The last election in 2020 is a disputed election. The United States, we should know, they have said that it's a disputed election. I agree with that. It is an election that is yet to be settled in the courts of Guyana. So when it comes to the question of democracy, Guyana is at best, an electoral democracy, and that is that we have elections periodically. These elections are certified by groups that go around the world certifying elections. But in terms of governance, we can hardly describe ourselves as a democracy. And we are a particular type of society, as you know. We're a society that is acutely divided along ethnic lines. And note I said acutely because most societies, if not all societies in the world, are divided along ethnic lines. There are very few societies, very few. One can think about Korea, where the overwhelming majority of people are Koreans. Very small minority of non-ethnic Koreans. Maybe Portugal, where the vast majority of people are Portuguese. Very tiny minority of non-Portuguese. Japan, the vast majority of people in Japan are Japanese. A very tiny minority of non-Japanese. But quite apart from those societies, all societies around the world are ethnically divided. There are some, like Guyana, that are acutely divided, bifurcated, as we would say, because you have two ethnic groups that are of similar size and with the capacity to undermine the other group, and neither the twain shall meet. And we refer to those societies as bifurcated societies, acutely excuse me, divided societies. Guyana falls into that category. These are very, very difficult societies. A place like the United States is an ethnically divided society. But there is a majority ethnic group, ethno-racial group, as in quote unquote white people are the majority. And so therefore they can have their way. But as we notice in the United States, that is changing. And because of that change, the United States is fast becoming like a place like Guyana, acutely divided. And we see the crisis of democracy there, what America used to call its democracy. It's now under really serious trial because white people are beginning to see that safe majority disappearing. In some places in the United States, say it's a place like California, is what we call a minority majority state. When you add all the minorities, African Americans, Korean Americans, Latino Americans, they are more than white Americans. And so they're what we call a minority majority state. And America is fast becoming an almost divided place in terms, equally divided in terms of the ethno-racial groups. And it's always difficult for democracy as we know it, a Western democracy, to flourish, to work well. Western democracy work well in generally homogeneous ethno-racial societies, European societies, majority of people there are white people. There may be different ethnic groups, but they're racially majority white people. And when one party gets into power, they're very clear that that party is not going to govern against the interests of white people. So in England, whether it's the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, whichever party is in power, it doesn't threaten the interests of white people. So the majoritarian democracy, that is a democracy where the majority rules. Majority rules, whereas, you get 50% plus one and you govern. In homogeneous societies, that has worked. But in societies like ours that are not homogeneous, we have a large African-American, African Guyanese group, large Indian Guyanese group, and then a small but substantial Amerindian group. But it's the Africans and the Indians. And the majoritarian democracy that we have been using, whereby 50 plus one, it means that when an election is finished, whichever party gets 50 plus one, that party governs. And that party is often the representative of one race or the other. And so in effect, it's one race that is governed. And what we have seen in our history is that that race, that party, does not govern in the interest of the other race. And so this thing that we call majoritarian democracy has not served us well. It has led to racial domination, whether we like it or not. Now, the party or the race in power sometimes try to enact policies that benefit all races. That has happened. Under the early PNC, under Mr. Burnham, they did enact policies that were beneficial to all races. And in some cases, they enact policies that were directly beneficial to one race or the other. However, the race that is in opposition does not allow the race that is in power to govern. That is the other problem. And so this majoritarian democracy that we use in Guyana has not worked. It has led to racial domination. And we have seen that in the last 3 years. It has always been there, but it's been more pronounced in the last 3 years. Why? Because we are now into a new era. Ethnic groups contest each other, fight each other over resources. Economic resources, political resources, cultural resources. They compete. In any society, groups compete over the resources. In European societies where they're homogeneous in terms of race, they fight over class distribution of resources. In our society, the fight is over racial distribution of resources. Class is there, but it's not the dominant factor. And what has happened is when there was little resources, we fought over the little resource. How is that little resource going to be distributed? What has happened over the last 3 years is that we now have more resources than we ever had. And the question is how that enlarged pie, what my brother Nigel used called the corn, how the corn is going to be shared. You have more corn. Remember Bob Marley said that my people before me slaved for this country. I build a cabin and I plant a corn. Now you look me in my face and you treat me with scorn. And so over the last years, it's about how that enlarged pie is being distributed. And in an era of easy access to resource, in an era of social media, in an era where the citizen is much more aware of what government is doing, we see the unequal distribution of resources playing out in our faces. And so democracy, Western democracy that we have been using, majoritarian democracy, is really in crisis. You know, in the United States of America, you all know that the coming election is being framed as an election to save democracy. They're trying everything to get Trump off the ballot because they feel he's a threat to democracy. And the Democrats are pitching the argument to the rest of the society that, look, we have to keep Trump out to save democracy. And that argument on the surface seems okay. The problem with that is that American democracy has not been good to all Americans. American democracy has not been necessarily good to African Americans. American democracy allowed slavery in the early days of the Republic. And when slavery came to an end legally, it allowed another 100 years of segregation, all to keep African Americans down. So American democracy has not always been good to African Americans. And while between the 1950s and the 1970s, there was civil rights legislation where the democratic process allowed for some rights to Africans, the very democracy has led to the rolling back of those rights for African Americans, the rolling back of voting rights, the rolling back of civil rights. So when you go to African Americans and tell them, come out and vote to save democracy, you are talking to people who have not benefited from that democracy. The democracy that Trump is primarily threatening is the democracy that has brought benefits to those in the society with privilege, white people. So this democracy thing is much more complex. Let me come back to Guyana. The PPP likes to talk about democracy. And what it does, it conveniently confines democracy to elections. Because it believed, correctly, that it could have won elections because of the ethnic majority of East Indians. And so it was in their benefit to confine democracy to election, because they could have won an election based on the ethnic majority. So if you reduce the meaning of democracy to election, you're in business. There's not an automatic majority of Indians for the PPP to win an election. But what the PPP has done is that they've worked out a formula to win elections. You all want to know what I mean by that. Let me make a parallel. After the Democrats began to win elections in America in the 30s and 40s and the 50s, coming down into the 60s, the Republicans figured out a formula to win elections. And that formula they used what was called the Southern strategy, which is to appeal to the racial sensitivities of white people in the South and win big in the South. 80-something percent, 90-something percent in places like Alabama and Mississippi and so on. You know, the what we call the Confederate South, the old slavery South. And they appeal to the sentiments of white people down there, and they win 80-90% of their votes. And then in the North, they win 50% of the white vote. So 90% of the white vote in the South, 50% of the white vote in the North and the West, and the Republicans were winning election after election. It's called the Southern strategy. The PPP has its own Southern strategy in Guyana, which is to appeal to the racial sentiments of East Indians, that if you don't vote for the PPP, you're going to be governed by those hooligans in the PNC. Black people are going to take control of this country. They are going to bully you. They are going to rape your women. They are going to do they appeal to all those racial sensitivities of Indians. And then they get 90% or more of the Indian vote. Not only that, but the fear that they drive in Indians bring Indians out to the poll more. So they have large turnout, and then they win 90-something% of the Indian vote. Then they go to the Amerindians, and they win about 55%, 60% of the Amerindian vote, and that's it, the PPP wins. That's their Southern strategy. They don't need African Guyanese votes. If they get African Guyanese votes, that's gravy. So they have their Southern strategy in Guyana, the PPP. The old strategy was clear. Indians are in the majority. You appeal to them, you're going to win. Indians are no longer a majority group in Guyana. So you have to work out a strategy, a new strategy. You know that Africans are not going to vote for you. So you appeal to the deep fears of Indians. Run up the clock, run up the vote, bring them out in large numbers. They vote for you in large numbers. So although they're not a majority, the larger turnout makes up for that majority. So, if you have, 40% Indians, 40% Africans, neither of them is a majority group. But if Indians turn out more and Africans don't turn out, the Indian 40% goes up. So the PPP is achieving the 50% among Indians by running up the turnout, the voter turnout among Indians, and suppressing voter turnout among Africans. But the PPP has gone further, as we saw in 2020. They realized that even that southern strategy, that racial strategy of running up the votes in the Indian community, had about 40, 60%, 55% of the Amerindian votes, that you could win with that. They realized that that is razor thin, as happened in 2015, 2011. So what they did in 2020 is they then looked for ways to get an extra 2 seats, 3 seats. And they came up with some added strategy. One is to create all these mushroom parties. All these little things come up and say they're parties. And the strategy with that is that is meant for Indians who, despite what the PPP says to them, Indians who decide we don't want the PPP, we don't like them, we're not going to vote for them. And the PPP is ensuring that those votes don't go to the PNC and the coalition. If you're vexed with me, vote for TNM, vote for all those, I don't even know their name, Anog and Panog and so on. And so that's a safety valve. We learned after the election that a lot of these groups were financed by PPP front people. And so the couple hundred, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 Indians who defy the PPP, they vote for these little parties. And we saw what happened. Those little parties joined the thing together, call it joinder, and they get a seat. What they did with that seat, they give it to the PPP. What the PPP give them give them the deputy speaker, name all of them as advisors in the government. It's PPP front groups. So that gave them one extra seat. What else did they do? They decided to manipulate the election before election day. And key to that was the voters list. If you have a voters list with 200,000 extra people on it, it's easy to thief 5,000, 10,000. People will hardly see that with the naked eye. That is why the PPP doesn't want to get rid of those extra people on the voters list. You get the extra people there, 200,000 of them, you can thief 5,000. Thanks to the recount, which was unconstitutional, but which they allowed to happen, but thanks to that recount, we saw what they did. 4,000 and odd people who were not in Guyana voted for them. That's one seat. And then we know the little thing that bring in 1,000 here, that people who were working on election day, more of them vote than were working. But they were able to get a seat and a half there. Then there are the 47 boxes, which amount to another seat and a half. So in a sense, what the PPP did, by manipulating the system, they were able to get an extra 3 seats. So the PPP has an electoral strategy to win elections in Guyana. That is what we're up against. We're up against the racial strategy of appealing to the fears of Indian people, get them out to the poll in large numbers, and you get 90% of their vote. Then you get 50, 55, 60% of the Amerindian vote. But you want to make sure that you go beyond that. You create some mushroom party so your people who vex with you and going over to the other side. They're going to go to these mushroom parties that you create. And then you manipulate the system via the voters list. So what you're losing with the old majority that the Indians had, that they no longer have, what you're losing there, you're making up with an electoral strategy. Now, some of you will say it's a legal strategy. Nothing is wrong in appealing to the fears of Indian people. Some of you would say nothing is wrong in creating front parties, mushroom parties. Some of you will even argue that nothing is wrong in manipulating the elections before election day, that election thieving is only on elections day. If you thief before election day, that's not thieving. Whatever you say, the PPP has an electoral strategy to win elections. Now, not satisfied with that, the PPP is giving itself something new, which it tried at the local government election, and that is to buy African votes. The PPP realized, as you all should realize, that there are African Guyanese who are alienated from the political system. Because the political system has not brought changes for them. They're alienated from their own party, meaning the PNC, because they were in there for 5 years and they did not see anything discernible that they did. So there is a good percentage of African Guyanese who are alienated. The PPP knows that, as you all should know, as I know, and as the PNC should know. And they make a play for that vote. They know they're not going to get that vote by just saying, vote for me, I'm a good party. They decide to buy the vote. They tried it at the local government election. They were confident it was going to work. Part of it is they've studied the psychology of African Guyanese. And they've come to the conclusion that as African Guyanese, you can get us with wine, women, and money. That has been a thing that they've had for decades. Wine, women, and money. You get black people anytime. And they tried it at the local government election. It was a trial run. The local government, it was a trial to see if the thing will work. And it almost worked. It almost worked. It's not until the last moment that the PNC realized what was happening, and they get up and and the rest of us always knew it was happening. And you can't counter the attempt to buy black people vote by talking stupidness. You have to go to black people and say, as black people, they're trying to buy you all like they bought you all as slaves. Pure and simple. You have to go there. And some of us have to go there. The PNC is always reluctant to go there. I understand why. But some of us have to go there and stop that thing. They were able to buy some. They got some. Well, it wasn't enough to make a difference. They get a 20 year, a 30 year, a 40 year. They're able to buy. Some of the people cock them, take the money, and they didn't vote for them. Some took the money and voted. But what the PPP was doing was opening up another front for votes. Now, they will get a 20 year, a 30 year by trying to buy black people vote. But more importantly, in making a pitch for black votes, at the end of an election, when your vote is inflated, you're then able to say, my vote, my extra vote came from black people, when in effect the extra vote comes from thieving. So by going after the black vote, you're giving the impression that you could win black votes. At the end of the day, when you get some inflated votes, you'll say, well, it's black people vote, we buy them. When in effect, you thief those votes. So the black strategy is two-edged. It's to try to pick off a few votes here and there. You might get a quarter seat. But more importantly, it becomes a mask for rigging. So that is what we are up against in the coming election. Does the opposition have a strategy? I come to that now. Does the opposition have a strategy? It is well within the opposition right to have a strategy. The only strategy we hear coming from the opposition is crossover vote. That's a myth. Let me walk you all through some history, yeah? In 1961 and 1964, some Indians voted for the UF, United Force, Portuguese-led party. They got most of the votes from Amerindians, the small Portuguese population, and they got some Indian votes. Let me explain to you all what happened in 61 and 64. The Indians who voted for the UF were mostly the urban Indians, business people who didn't like jargon communism. And in the heat of the Cold War, they were taken by the whole thing of capitalism and so on. So there were more urban Indians. But here is something that happened in those elections. In the seats around Georgetown that the United Force contested, the PPP did not contest those seats. And they winked to the Indians in those constituencies to vote for the UF. You're learning something here tonight. Go back and check the history. The PPP did not contest the urban seats that the UF was strong in and that the UF won. And they winked to the Indians in those constituencies to vote UF to keep PNC out. And that is what happened. So the Indians who, quote unquote, crossed from the PPP didn't go to the PNC, they went to the UF. And the PPP enabled that by not contesting in those constituencies that the UF was strong. 61 and 64. You all go back and check. Let's come now to 2006 election. We had some cross, some black people bolted from the PNC and voted for the new Alliance for Change. AFC had just come on the scene, led by Raphael Trotman. The PNC usually will get about 42% of the votes in that time. They slipped down to 34%. That was about 5 or 6 seats. They lost. They lost it to the AFC. So black people moved from the PNC, not to the PPP. They moved to the AFC, which they saw as another black party. Raphael Trotman was the leader. Those votes that the AFC got in 2006 were Raphael Trotman's votes. Raphael Trotman had left the PNC. Sheila Old had left the WPA. Ramsatan had left the PPP. But Ramsatan didn't take Indian votes with him. Sheila Old may have taken some middle-class votes that the WPA might have influenced in those days. Not many. She may have taken them. But Raphael Trotman took black people, PNC votes with him. And the AFC was able to win 5 seats or 6 seats. So the cross was not crossover. It was a cross from one black party to another black party in 2006. Come 2011, Corbyn played the master stroke. He went to the WPA and said, let's form a coalition. They formed the APNU. And the black people who went with Trotman went back now. Because the quarrel with the PNC was that you weren't dynamic. You weren't looking after black people. You depend on stupidness. Now with the APNU, Corbyn is saying, well, we end up on stupidness. Look, we reach out to be all enemy. We serious. Those black people went back. Trotman is removed as leader, and in comes Nagamutu. And Nagamutu brought Indian votes with him. Ramtatan didn't bring Indians with him, but Nagamutu did, because Nagamutu had built up support in the PPP. So the AFC shifted from a black party now to an Indian party. And those Indians who came, they came with Nagamutu, were Nagamutu votes. So Indians didn't cross over to the PNC. They went to another Indian party, led now by Nagamutu, 2011. And remember the AFC saying all this time, we're not joining with the PNC. We're not joining with the PNC. We're not joining with the PNC. So Indians felt safe to follow Nagamutu into the AFC. Things, however, changed. The AFC felt that they could take a chance and go with the PNC because the WPA is there. And the reasoning was that if the archenemy of the PNC, the WPA, can work out an arrangement with them, maybe it's a chance we could take. And then, of course, power beckons. And the AFC decided to go into the coalition. Some of the Indians left and went back to the PPP. Some of them. But some of them stayed. I think about half of them stayed. And together, they were able to win by 1 seat in 2015. What I'm demonstrating in 2006, 2011, 2015, people didn't cross over. They crossed from one black party in 2006 to a new black party led by Trotman in 2006. 2011, 2015, they crossed from Indian PPP to an Indian AFC. 2020, Nagamootoo is removed. The PNC reason that Ramjatan can't bring Indian votes. They maybe think that Granger did enough to appeal to Indians and they ran with Granger. The Indians went back to the PPP, and those who didn't go back to the PPP went to them little party. And we saw what the result was, a tiffin result partly, but the coalition couldn't retain power, partly because of the manipulation and partly because outside forces went along with the manipulation by the PPP. Sisters and brothers, what I'm arguing here tonight, by walking you through the sociology of our politics, our political history, is that crossover vote that the PNC is talking about, it's nonsense. Ask Desmond Hoyt. Mr. Hoyt had done so much policy-wise that benefited the Indians. The ERP, the structural adjustment, all benefiting the Indians. The opening up of the economy to the private sector. Who was in the private sector? Indians. And Hoyt really felt that he had done enough and Indians were going to vote for him. They didn't. And he went to his grave being very bitter about that. As the WPA. When the WPA was fighting the PNC, it attracted black people because Ascri had brought into the WPA radical black people. There's always been a 10-50% of black people who are quite radical. And they went with Ascria. That same group went with Raphael in 2006. And so Ascria brought that into the WPA. And then Indians later came into the WPA. But once elections came about in 1992, free and fair elections as we called it then, the Indians went back to the PPP. And when African people saw that, they too went back to the PNC. She asked the WPA. In 1992, WPA got one seat, and they got that one seat. You know where they got the votes from? Buxton. We got 1/3 of the Buxton votes. 1/3 of the Buxton vote, and we got Amerindian vote from Region 8 and Region 9, and we got a seat. All the other black people and all the other Indian people, blank we and gone back. And people felt that the WPA would have gotten about 30% of the votes, might have even won that election. The amount of Indians, the number of Indians and Africans who were following us. No, sir. As Jamaicans would say, no, sir. They went right back. So ask Desmond Hoyt. Ask the WPA. And they will tell you that crossover vote is a myth. Why in God's name the present PNC is still holding on to that myth, I don't know. Unless they think Indian people stupid. As I asked last night, what is the PNC or the WPA going to say to Indians, or the AFC going to say to Indians to tell them don't vote for the PPP? If Indians don't vote for the PPP and vote for the coalition, they're going to do that on their own. They don't need the PNC to appeal to them. They don't need WPA or AFC to appeal to them. They will do it on their own. Why expend energy on a myth? History has shown that it's a myth. The Indians who are going to vote for the PNC/coalition already make up their mind. That's what they're doing. The blacks who are going to vote for the PPP already make up their mind. That's what they're going to do. The crossover vote is a myth. Note, I'm not saying that Indians won't vote for the coalition or the PNC or whoever, but they're going to do that on their own. You don't have to go and tell. We're going to go and tell them, oh, the PNC policy, the PPP policy is hurting Indians. They damn well know that. They don't need you to tell them that. They don't need I to tell them that. They don't need me to tell them that. They know that. But will that translate into them voting against the PPP? No. Those who are vexed with the PNC right now, where they're casting their gaze, some of them perhaps are casting their gaze to the WPA. Thank you all so much, those of you who are doing that. Some may cast their gaze to the AFC. The point I am making is that you may be vexed with the PNC, but you aren't going to the PPP. In your head, the WPA and the AFC are part of the family. And the Indian people are going to go to Anog or them little PNM, TNM, which will come alive around election. And if they're so vexed with the PNC, the PPP, they're going to go there. So if the opposition strategy is crossover votes, they're in serious trouble. As I've pointed out, the opposition constituency, meaning particularly the African Guyanese constituency, is not a monolith. It has never been a monolith, but more so today it's not, for obvious reasons. They're the diehards who probably make up the majority. They're going to vote for the PNC, whichever coalition the PNC is in, they're going to vote for them regardless of what. But then there has always been a radical group of Black people who don't like the PNC. In the early days, that group rallied behind Askria. Askria used to go in Linden and call strike, although it was a political party. And then when Askria became WPA, they went with Askria into the WPA. When the WPA subsided and the AFC come on the scene, they went with Raphael. When the WP and the PNC joined together and formed the APNU, they come back. There's always been a radical section of the Black community that can't stand the PNC politics. In every society, there is that radical section. In every society. It's not just Guyana. But in Guyana, it's much more pronounced. Among African Guyanese. And that is the group that are very clear that in Guyana they're being oppressed because they're Africans. That's the conscious Africans who make up that radical group. It's a mixture of conscious African identity and a kind of radical revolutionary thing. The two go together in the Black community. A mixture of I ain't that nonsense. This thing while you're talking, I ain't with that. We got revolution. So it's a mixture of radicalism and African consciousness. Strong group in the Black community. And it's there right now. When the PPP is going after Rickford Bork and the so-called social media influencers, the reason they're going after us is that they know that we are on to that group. And that group is going to mash up any of the PPP plans. When they try to buy votes, is that group who's going to say, here, we are not slaves. The other group will say, the PPP is buying votes, and that is unconstitutional. No, the radical black people are going to say, you're trying to buy us, we are not slaves. Different language. The other set of black people will say, oh, the PPP is trying to buy votes, and that is against the spirit of the Constitution. Black heart people, black conscious people say, you are trying to turn us into slaves, and it ain't gonna happen. So the PPP going after people like Bork and myself and Mark and so on, they realize that we are helping to socialize that group. And that group, the opposition has to have a plan for that group, because you cannot go to that group and tell them nonsense. Shortly before the 2020 election, the WPA went to 24 villages, black villages, from Anns Grove to Stroudville on the West Coast. And we were getting 50 people. Some places we got 75. We went to Beirut, we get over 200, right? But we were getting 50, 40, and so on. And the question they were asking us, tell us why we should vote for the coalition in 2020. Every village we went. And we reasoned that if 50 of them were brave to come out, they got 10 times that 50 in that community. And we realized we had a problem on our hand. That we had a group of African Guyanese who were dissatisfied with the behavior of the coalition. Whether they were wrong or right, it's not for me to discuss tonight. We went back and we reported that to the leaders of the coalition. And we volunteered in the WPA. We volunteered that we give us some resources and we're going to go and work on those people and bring them into the fold. I'm going to skip what happened with that proposal tonight. I'm going to skip what happened with that proposal. And I'm saying again, there is that group in our support base, the radical group who you can't go to and tell nonsense. You can't just appeal to their loyalty. They ain't going PPP, but they're not taking any and anything. I invite those of you, Kidaki do a call-in program every morning. I invite you all who don't listen to that call-in program, and you all will get a sense of what I am saying. Because those programs, the people who call in there, are a reflection of the group that I'm talking about. And then there are the people who are so alienated. They're mostly young people, young black people are so alienated. Some of them will go and take the PPP money. Some of them will say, let me go and smoke my weed and have a good time, drink my liquor, and, be good. And I ain't depend you all nonsense. I depend higher thing. But we have. But we need them. They're not going to go and take the PPP money and thing. But they bust all we have. Then you get those who are so alienated, they're going to take the PPP money. and may give them their vote. We have to have a plan for all those groups rather than having a plan for crossover vote. It is utter nonsense. I am yet to hear the plan from the opposition for those groups that I'm talking about. The conscious African, the alienated African, the vulnerable African who is likely to fall for the PPP little money they're throwing at them. What is our plan? What are our plans for that group? I can tell you, we in the WP are working out a plan for that group, but we recognize we can't punch outside of we wait, but we recognize these groups, and we for the last 3 years have been working out. And we would like to sit with the rest of the opposition and share our perspectives. There's no all opposition group. We have made several attempts, Now, if an election is called tomorrow, I don't want to give the impression that we're going to do so badly. If an election is called tomorrow, we're going to step up. And we're going to do very well, and we may probably win. But what I'm saying is that you don't want to left things to chance. The PPP is not leaving things to chance. The PPP got their strategy. And they tried at the local government elections. We were on the defensive at the local government election. We had to defend territory. And that happens when you don't have a plan. So all those who are talking about election, the point I am making is that we got work to do at the level of tactics and strategy and at the level of consciousness. You got to beat the PPP. And in order to beat the PPP, you got to beat the PPP strategy. There's nothing you can do to stop the PPP from appealing to Indian sentiment. You can talk whatever you want to the majority of Indian people. They ain't left in the PPP. I'm saying that no. You can go in all them Indian community from now till the cows come home. You're not going to move the Indian people, the vast majority of them. That is a done deal. They're going to come out in their large numbers and they're going to vote for the PPP. You can't do nothing but the mushroom parties. That's a done deal. In terms of the pre-election rigging, you can do something about that. But you're not going to get that by crying and complaining. We are already doing some good work in terms of alerting the outside people to the rigging. That's why they're going after Rickford Burke, because he bold like that. He bold like that. And so that's part of the strategy, is to get the outside people on the side when it comes to the rigging. But we have to do our work inside. And the PPP is not going to respond to a certain kind of reasoning. We have to find a way to use our support, our numbers, to force the PPP to clean up that list. The courts are not going to help us. The courts have said very clearly they're not touching that. The Americans and British will only help us if we help ourselves. What is our strategy to get a clean electoral machinery? all the top people at GCOM on the PPP side, among the commissioners, they get a 4-3 because the chair has been voting with them. How do we change that? Because that is going to be critical to stop them from rigging. If we can't stop them from rigging, then we have to have enough votes coming from some way to overcome the rigging. In 2020, we didn't have enough votes to overcome the rigging because a good 20% of our base we didn't pay attention to. We pay attention to the 70%, 75% that the polls tell us love Granger. And we didn't pay attention to the 25% that didn't love him. And so we didn't have enough votes to overcome the rigging. And if we can't stop the rigging in 2025 or 2024, whenever they call the election, if we can't stop the rigging, we'll have to have enough votes to overcome the rigging. And those votes are coming from no crossover. They're not coming from no crossover. My submission is that we have to do both. We have to stop the rigging, and we have to get votes to overcome the rigging if it happens. Walk on 2 foot. Where is the opposition strategy? As I said, we in the WPA, in our little corner, we are working out our strategy for those matters. But we are a small party. Perhaps bigger than people think we are, but we're still a small party. We're not big as the PNC. That is why we need polling. We need polling so that we'll get a sense of where our people stand. One of the disasters of the last coalition was that we had one big party and we treat all the others as little-known entities. If we go into a coalition the next time, I hope we don't make that mistake. Guyana's politics is much more complex. There is the opposition supporter. There's a type of opposition supporter. Only the PNC could talk to them. And then they got others, only like the WPA could talk to them. But you also got others who the PNC and the WPA and the AFC could talk to them at the same time. They're receptive to all of us. Our support base is much more complex than we think. It's not simplistic. One of the consequences about politics is that you radicalize your people, but you don't want to deal with the consequences of the radicalism. You educate your people, you give them consciousness, but you don't want to deal with the consciousness, because the consciousness means that they're going to question you. I have no doubt in my mind that people that we are helping to educate and to become more conscious will question us. And they have a right to. And sometimes we don't want to deal with it. We want to radicalize people to put we in power, but not to question us. I know you all don't always agree with me, and that's okay. That's okay. You don't have to agree with me with everything. If that happens, then we depend on stupidness. We have to radicalize, socialize our supporters, not only to put us in power, but also to question us and to tell us when we're wrong. You all know my policy. I don't abuse off the opposition. I don't abuse off politicians and parliamentarians on the opposition side. I don't do it as a rule. But on the matter of Argyle, I thought Mr. Norton and the PNC got it wrong. Some PNC leaders have contacted me and said, not me. But anyhow, your leader says so you gotta go along with it. I noticed Mr. Norton said today that Ralph Gonzalez was wrong to take out a picture with a Venezuela map that got Guyana in it. Well, Aubrey, Ralph was bad news from the beginning. And you should do like the WP and say, Ralph is bad news. Don't wait till he take out a picture with the Guyana map, with the Venezuela map with Guyana, and then say it's bad news. That's the difference between the WP and others. Ralph come from the left of the Caribbean. The WPA come out of that radical left. Ralph is our natural ally. I love Ralph. I admire Ralph. But we in the WPA are bold enough to say to Ralph, you are bad news when it comes to Guyana. Get the hell out of the way. Our brothers and sisters in the PNC got to wait till he take out a picture. The man is bad news. And you all have to say that. We are not surprised that he take out a picture with that map. Ralph has become reckless in his old age. And I say that to somebody who loved the brother. But I'm saying to my comrades in the PNC, stop playing games on some of these matters. It's either Ralph is good or he's not good when it comes to Guyana. And he's damn well not good. And say it. I don't normally criticize the PNC. I know a lot of you all believe that Norton is my partner. And a lot of you all just send email to me and voice note cussing me. Well, why are defending Norton? Why I don't take a strong stand against Norton? I take them cuss every day. Every day. Some of you don't send it to Kinaki. There's got to be the messenger to pass it to me. I know. And I stand with the brother most of the time, out of a matter of principle. But on this matter of Venezuela, he gets himself tangled up. And this is a matter that is so clear. Nobody questions the patriotism of Norton and the PNC. Everybody knows that the PNC has been much more pro-Guyana than the PPP has ever been. Everybody knows that. So Norton and the PNC don't have to prove their patriotism. I hope they're hearing me. And I hope they don't take it the wrong way. On some matters, you have to distinguish clearly where you stand. You have a set of crooks who are prepared tomorrow, if you allow them, to give Venezuela some of what they're asking for. You already give them a meeting when they should not have given them a meeting. The PPP will, in the blink of an eye, give away part of Guyana's patrimony. They may not give away land, but they will give something to Venezuela because that's their politics, transactional. That's how they deal with black people. Transactional. Give me a penny to sell we $1 billion vote. That's how they see politics. Transactional. Give Indian people enough. Give them more than black people. So that when Indian people say we're not getting enough, you say to them, but you are getting more than black people. Transactional, that's how the PPP see politics. And I am the first to agree that a large part of politics is transactional. I'm not saying nay. But the PPP is also transactional. And they will transact away Guyana. And the PNC must stay clear away from that. As I said, I'm sure if a poll is taken, 80-90% of the PNC support base of the opposition support base of African Guyanese, 80-90% of all people will be against Argyle. What is the leader and the leading party doing supporting Argyle? Get your act together. And I feel very strongly on this. That's why I've come out on it. You want to go to an election and say to your people that your conscience is clear when it comes to Venezuela and what they're trying to get out of Guyana. Your people must not question whether you are going to give away a piece of Guyana. And you must be able to point out to them that the PPP is prepared to give away their ass and shit through their ribs, because that's the way they look at politics. I love you all so much. And I hope tonight that we've been able to bring ourselves a little bit closer to an understanding of our reality. What I said tonight is what you all already know. My job is not to tell you all what you all know, is to bring it all together so that we can see the big picture. And that's what I've been trying to do tonight. That's what I've been trying to do last night. That's what I tried to do the night before. That's our mission in this first part of the year. To make it clear for our people and to be honest with you all. To be honest. If you start off by saying, I don't want to offend Indian people, you end up offending Black people. You have to start by saying, I don't want to offend any Guyanese of any group. We love you, and we're going to be back tomorrow night to continue our discussion. I hope we've moved closer tonight to where we should be in terms of our understanding of what is to be done. Love.